And there are media reports on this Sunday that say Vladimir Putin has now appointed General Alexander Dvornikov to head up the campaign. Up until now, Russia has reportedly directed the war from Moscow with no central commander on the ground. Dvornikov has previously commanded Russian forces supporting the Assad regime in Syria. Well, to talk about the latest tactics being employed by both Russia and Ukraine, we're reaching out now to Christian Leuprecht. He is a security expert and professor of political science, both at the Royal Military College of Canada and Queen's University. Christian, good to see you again.
Good afternoon, Michael. Hello.
Listen, I want to begin with this news. Again, media reports suggesting that Russia has now appointed a general with combat experience in Syria to oversee the Ukrainian invasion. What does that signal to you? What does that mean for any Russian tactics going forward, do you think?
Well, for one thing, it suggests that maybe the Kremlin is trying to give up running the war from afar with political leadership and actually trying to professionalize the way the war is conducted by handing it to the military and handing it to generals in the field. But it also suggests that this might not necessarily be the experience you want, because Syria for the Russians was primarily an air campaign with some coordination with irregulars and militias on the ground. And of course, the real trouble that Russia has had has not been in the air. The real trouble has been to amass the troops and the combat capability to take terrain and to hold terrain in particular cities and urban warfare. And even with this new, perhaps more integrated command structure, it still means that Russia is contending with severely depleted battalions to try to get back into this fight.
Now, the Ukrainian president, as you know, and his ministers, they have pleaded with the West for more equipment. Their mantra at this point has been, help us fight so that you don't have to. How would you assess the Western support up until this point? How effective has it been or not been in aiding Ukraine's defense against Russia?
Yeah, there's two components to this. One is that Ukraine is starting to have trouble in some of the logistics. The Russians have been bombing some of the fuel supply and other supply depots. Ukraine is running in some cases low on ammunition and on ordnance, in part because the West doesn't make much of the ordnance that Ukraine is using. And the fight in Donbass and Luhansk will be somewhat different than the fight in Kiev, because it will be much more conventional maneuver warfare, where you actually need to be able to show up with real sizable equipment, tanks, artillery pieces, and so forth, rather than sort of these light infantry sort of movements that we had seen around Kiev and staving off the advance. And so part of the challenge here is that we're moving into a different phase of this war that requires different equipment, but it also requires a reconstitution and a sustainment and maintenance of the Ukrainian force that, of course, has been severely battered and is having difficulty doing that on their own, since their factories and so forth are coming under Russian attack.
Mm-hmm. Now, May 9th, as you know, is a highly symbolic date for Russia, for Putin and the Kremlin. Talk to us about that day and the concern right now that the anniversary may prompt some desperate moves by Russia in Ukraine.
Yeah, so my guess is that what the Russians will try to do is take all of Donbass and Luhansk oblasts. It's not clear that they'll be able to do that with the forces that they have, given how depleted and demoralized those forces are. But the Russians will put up a considerable fight. So Ukraine is likely in for some very tough fighting in the coming weeks in the eastern part. And Putin, I mean, he has this is a general that has condoned and used non-conventional weapons in Syria, in particular chemical weapons, and then calling in airstrikes on civilian populations after using chemical weapons. So we can see, I think, more humanitarian suffering, deliberate targeting of civilians, and potentially the escalation, the use of non-conventional weapons. And we can all hope that the Russians will keep their tactical nuclear weapons out of this fight.
Mm-hmm. And to reiterate, and again, correct me if I'm wrong here, you're saying this general in the past has used chemical weapons as attack civilian targets. So if that is the case, how should the West respond? Again, May 9th is Victory Day in Russia. It's the day that the anniversary that marks the surrender of Germany to Russia, to the former Soviet Union. How should the West respond now if chemical warfare becomes an increasing possibility ahead of May 9th?
So Putin still has the initiative here, and he controls the escalation ladder, both horizontally and vertically. And so it's important that the West continues to be resolute in sending signals that as Russia oversteps, that we draw clear red lines, and as Russia oversteps those red lines, the West can continue to escalate, and potentially not just with sanctions, in order to rein in Russian excesses, Russian abuses, and gross Russian violations of international law, of international norms, and of the law of armed conflict. And that, I think, will be the challenge that the West has, both the escalation, making sure there's political unity, in that we know we're going to have to continue likely to escalate, as Putin is likely to escalate over the coming weeks, because he will need to have something to show for by May 9th.
Christian, it's good to get your thoughts on this. Thank you. And, as we say thank you to Christian Leuprecht, Professor of Political Science at both the Royal Military College of Canada and Queen's University. Christian, I also want to note the fact that you have a new book out, Intelligence as Democratic Statecraft is the title. It's published by Oxford University Press. So congratulations on the book, Christian, and thank you for the time today.
My pleasure. Thank you.